Hi everyone, thank you for clicking on this video and I bet you won't regret it because I'll be talking about something interesting. Are you curious? But first of all, let me introduce myself. Hi everyone, my name is Ria Sandora. I'm a student of Universitas Tanjungpura, Faculty of Economics and Business, majoring in Management International Class Batch 2019. Have you ever heard about this quote? Music is moonlight in the gloomy night of life. Yeah, music is that important in our lives. That's why in this video, we'll be talking about culture and entertainment at the beginning and at the end of the first decade of this 21st century. So guys, the first decade of this 21st century is the 2000s. Began on 1st January 2000 and ended on 31st December 2009. In the 2000s era, people, culture and entertainment are different from the people in the 2010s. So I know it's only been 10 years, but there are quite a lot of changes and differences in people's behavior in that time span. Of course, there are changes that lead to positive things, but on the other hand, there are also changes that lead to negative things. So I'll start with culture first. But I need you to know first that what is meant by culture here refers to people's behavior, people's habit, and what they love to do. Okay, so at the beginning of the decade, people did things by themselves. Although they are busy with one thing, but when there is a need for another thing, they will do both of them together. Or in other words, you can say that life was not yet practical. But at the end of the decade, there are various applications that are quite helpful, such as Gojek and Grab. So for example, someone is busy working, but at the same time having to deliver goods to other people, then they can use one of the features of Gojek, which is Gosen. The Gosen will deliver the goods safely to the destination, while the person can continue working. But this then becomes a habit, because even though people are not busy, they tend to use this application. So nowadays, people choose to pay someone else to do something instead of doing it by themselves. And in addition, at the beginning of the decade, most people went out using public transportation, right? But with the existence of Gojek and Grab, the use of public transportation becomes less. Some people turn to Gojek and Grab because the drivers can come immediately and they can leave right away, unlike public transportation that have you to wait for a long time and then cramped with other people. But beside those advantages, there are also changes that lead to negative things, like what I've said before. And it can be seen in children. So before, in the 2000s, children usually spent their time by playing with their friends. For example, like playing marbles, playing kites, hide and seek, or congklak, a traditional game from Indonesia, and other games that can be done together. But at the end of the decade, when Android began to enter, precisely around the end of 2008, and then the internet began to develop, many parents bought smartphones for their children. So the children spend more time by playing alone with their phones. But the biggest mistake here is in the use of the phones, where the children are not monitored well by their parents. So the phones are used by the children to open things that are inappropriate for them. They even play mobile games until they forget about the time. But not only children, actually, even adults also become more individualistic because of this. They usually play play their phones or other gadgets when gathering with friends or family. So from here, we can see that people's behavior gradually changes over time. So after talking about culture, what about the entertainment? So in the 2000s, children in the 2000s usually watch films and movies that were appropriate for their age. Also supported by Indonesian televisions at that time that provided useful and educational programs for children such as Doraemon, SpongeBob, Dora, Jimmy Neutron, and so on. But we can see that children born in the 2010s tend to watch films and movies that are not appropriate for them. and not educational for them. This also happened as the Indonesian televisions that have presented films and movies that are not useful and make no sense. So the children see movies that are not for them. You can see that Indonesian televisions has changed when children's programs are broadcast in the morning when the children go to school, while gossips and soap operas are broadcast in the afternoon until night when the children are at home. So it's not surprising if you find primary kids exchange love letters or even declare their love, because the program that they watch doesn't match their age. And then, by the way, there were also famous movies, films, and books at the decade. So at the beginning of the decade, movies and films that were popular was more likely to be a romantic one. For example, like Ada Apa Dengan Cinta from Indonesia. And then the horror ones, for example, like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Saw, and Final Destination. And at the end of the decade, the genre is almost the same with the 2000s horror and romance. For example, the horror one, the famous ones are The Conjuring, Annabelle, and Insidious. But the difference here are the censorship and language. So at the beginning of the decade, the censorship wasn't too strict. So many movie scenes that contain violence and excessive love were left on air, but at the end of the decade, the censorship has been tightened. And then about language, the 2000s films usually use correct and good Indonesian language, but the 2010s films usually used slang languages. Okay, now continue to books. In the 2000s eras, people read more books in the form of magazine. For example, Bobo magazine. It was really popular at that time. But at the end of the decade, people choose to read novels because they think that the stories in novels are more diverse than magazines. For example, the famous novel in Indonesia is a novel by Ilanatan, which title is Spring in London. It was published in 2010, and I myself have read the book, and it was amazing diction with amazing storyline. And now let's continue to the other part of entertainment. So if we're talking about entertainment, it's not only about films and then movies and then books, but there are also music and the bands. So music and the bands in Indonesia at the beginning of the decade, people listen more to local bands like Ungu or Peter Pan or Sheila on 7. But at the end of the decade, people listen more to music from foreign bands. For example, like in 2010, people are going crazy and fell head over heels for One Direction or 1D, a boy band from London. And at that time also, Korean pop or K-pop began to be popular in Indonesia, for example, like SNSD or Girls' Generation and Super Junior. And it makes Indonesian bands declined in popularity because people listen more to music from foreign bands. Okay, so those are changes that happened between the beginning and the end of the first decade of this 21st century. So, however, do you know that in that 10 years, 2000 to 2010, there also occurred some important events related to culture and entertainment. So, at the end of the decade, in Indonesia especially, this is about culture. In Indonesia, women were once considered as the second class, right? But on the 23rd July 2001, Mrs. Megawati Soekarno Putri became the first president, the first female president of Indonesia. And this shows that the society's treatment to women has changed. Women are no longer underestimated and have the same rights as men. And then, meanwhile, at the end of the decade, outside Indonesia, there was an advance in LGBT, the legalization for same-sex marriage in 18 countries, including Argentina, and then France, Great Britain, Australia, and then Germany and the United States. The culture of these countries changed because accepting this same-sex relationship. And then what about entertainment? So after talking about culture, right? What about the entertainment? What important events about entertainment? So in the 2004, in Indonesia especially, there was a singing contest. There was a singing contest in Indonesia, and the winner was decided by the judges, and the judges' decision was final. So the judges consisted of vocal coach, music observers, and then senior musicians, and then singers who measured the contestants' skills on the stage, while the audience only became the commentator. They only became the commentator, so they may analyze, but they may not decide because the decision is in the hands of the judges. But however, at the end of the decade, the function of judges is transferred to the public. So public votes for the contestants, and the voting will determine the winner. So it seems like the contestants are no longer measured by aesthetic understanding or vocal understanding, but they are measured by their looks, because audience choose based on looks. It makes the beauty standard of a singer comes first than the talent. Okay guys, so that's all I can explain about the changes of culture and entertainment in the first decade of this 21st century, also the important events inside. I hope you can get something and learn from this video. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Bye!